Hi everyone, this is William from the Headphone Experience, and this is my long overdue full review of the Hifiman Ef600 combination headphone amp and DAC. And this was loaned to me for review by Hifiman, and I want to thank Hifiman for being so patient with me. I got a ton of equipment in quite a while ago all at the same time and really got behind on my reviews. And it's been several months since I did my first impressions on this, but I have had a lot of listening time with this and a chance to compare it to several other pieces of equipment. So I'm finally getting around to doing my full review. This currently sells at $649, down from its original price of $799. It is a combination DAC and headphone amp and can be used as a standalone DAC. It has 3 digital inputs, which would be USB, coaxial, and Bluetooth, and there are 2 separate USB outlets on the back of this, a Type B and a Type C, but there's only one USB switch on the top, on the front, so I'm only counting it as one USB input. So you have a choice depending on what cable you're using of Type B or Type C, but you can't hook up 2 devices to the 2 different inputs and then toggle between them. It doesn't work that way. So basically 3 digital inputs. It has 2 analog inputs, and those are on the rear. That would be RCA single-ended and XLR balanced. And it has 4 analog outputs. On the rear, you have your RCA single-ended output and your XLR balanced outputs to use this as a standalone DAC, and then hook it up to a separate amp. And then on the front, you have your 2 headphone outputs, which are 6.3 millimeter single-ended and 4-pin XLR balanced. This unit, the DAC, uses 2 of Hifiman's own Himalaya Pro DAC chips. This is rated by Hifiman to have a signal-to-noise ratio of 118 decibels and a channel separation of 131 decibels. The power, according to Hifiman, on their website, it says 5.12 watts per channel or 5,120 milliwatts per channel. And it does not state how many ohms that is into. I'm assuming it's probably into 32 ohms. That's usually how Hifiman rates their amp. So if that's the case, 5.12 watts per channel into 32 ohms is a lot of power, and going to be enough power for any headphone you want to throw at this thing. The width of this, and it's wider at the bottom, is about 4.1 inches. The depth is about 6.5. That was at the bottom. A little bit more, a little bit wider if you count the volume knob sticking out. And it's about 11 inches tall. And the website does not state the weight of this, so I weighed it, and according to my kitchen scale, this weighs in at approximately 6¼ pounds. So I want to give you a little bit of a closer up look at this. You can see the front, that you see this big volume knob here, and instead of the typical round volume knob, it's a rectangle, but it seems to be pretty smooth and pretty solid. And then you've got 2 toggle switches here. This one toggles between, you've got 4 choices. You've got high gain, non-oversampling or oversampling, and then you've got low gain, non-oversampling or oversampling. And it's one of the things I'm not crazy about on this. I wish it had 2 separate buttons, so I could toggle between the oversampling and non-oversampling, or toggle between high gain and low gain without having to go through all 4, because it only goes in one direction. So you start out at high gain, no oversampling, then high gain oversampling, low gain oversampling, and low gain no oversampling. And it's not a real big deal if you're in high gain and you want to go from high gain oversampling to get to non-oversampling, you have to toggle down through the 2 low gain settings and back around. and it's just kind of a hassle. I wish it had two separate buttons controlling those two different features. Then your other button toggles between your inputs. The first one is USB or coaxial, the next is Bluetooth, and you've got your RCA analog in and your balanced analog in. To use this as a standalone amp, where you could hook another DAC up to this. The back, almost forgot to show you the back. At the top, you've got your digital inputs here. You've got your two USB inputs, your Type B and your Type C. Once again, there's only one switch on the front for USB, so you can't hook up two separate units of that. It's just a choice of one or the other. And then you've got your coaxial input and your Bluetooth, and it does come with a Bluetooth antenna. I did want to mention this does not have a optical digital input, which I wish it did. There's room back here. I wish it had optical, but it doesn't, and I guess I can live with that. Then you've got your inputs here, your RCA single-ended and your XLR balanced inputs, and then your outputs, your RCA single-ended and your XLR output or balanced. Then down at the bottom, you have your rear power switch here, and then your 120 volt AC input line here. And then, as you can see from the side, this is tapered, and this can be used as a pretty nice headphone stand. Let me grab a headphone here, and I'll show you how that looks. And works real well as a headphone stand. And if you're worried about it getting warm, it does get slightly warm, but it never gets warm enough that you have to worry about it damaging your headphone. The case, the front and rear are aluminum panels. This part is plastic, and I will be honest, the plastic does give it a little bit of a cheap look. I wish it was all aluminum, but I think the idea of the plastic is it doesn't dissipate the heat and warm up enough to, possibly damage your headphones. There's vents on the bottom on both sides, and then vents on the top at the front and back, which keeps the heat away from your headphones and dissipates it out the top. Like I said, this does get a little bit warm, but it never gets hot. You don't have to worry about it, getting anything near it too hot, or even, warming up your headphones to the point it could possibly damage them. But I will mention that in the summer, putting on a pair of headphones with the ear pads pre-warmed might not be what you want, because leather ear pads can get warm after wearing them for a while, and you probably don't want to start out with them warm. So you might not want to hang it on this if it's turned on in the summer. So, and I did want to point out that the bottom of this is pretty much a smooth piece of plastic. Actually, it's got kind of a rubber feel to it, but it's pretty hard rubber, and it can be a little slick on some surfaces. This table, it's not bad here, but on some surfaces, it's a little bit slick where when you plug in your headphones or unplug them, it can slip a little bit, even though it has pretty good weight to it at 6¼ pounds. So if this were mine, like I said, this is a loaner from Hifiman, I might, get some softer rubber stick-on pads or something to put on this to make it less slippery. So before I get into the sound of this, I wanted to mention the equipment I've used. I did try this out on my desk using the USB input. My computer is a HP desktop. I was using Windows 10 and Windows Media Player, playing CDs that I ripped to my computer in WAV lossless format. And then I also used a couple of CD players as transports into the digital inputs of this, and that was the Cambridge Audio 540C and the SMS LPL200, like I said, as transports only. I did not try them with a analog signal into this. I used them with a digital signal and utilized the DAC inside of this instead of the DAC in the CD player. Headphones. I tried this with several Hifiman headphones. including the Susvara and the HE6SE V2, which are the two hardest to drive headphones that I have, pretty much two of the hardest headphones in the world to drive. And among other hi-fi mans like the HE, what is this? It's the HE1000 SE and the Aria Organic and the Ananda Nano, and use this with a ton of headphones. Also some headphones from ZMF, Kennerton, and JM Audio. The amp DAC combinations or stacks that I compared this to were the Hifiman Ef600, the Hifiman Serenade, the iFi Audio Neo IDSD2, and the topping, A70 Pro D70 Pro Saber version stack. And those range in price from $399 for the Ef600 up to about $1,200 for the topping stack. So getting into the sound, I'll start out by saying that this is, in my opinion, slightly on the warm side of neutral, and to me that's a good thing. I kind of getting away from dry, sterile sounding amps and DACs. I like a little bit of warmth and just makes them more pleasant, in my opinion, and raises up the level of musicality a little bit. Detail and clarity from this is excellent. Not the absolute last word in detail, but I'll explain that in a few minutes in my comparison, but I do consider the detail and clarity to be excellent. The soundstage is wide and the soundstage has good depth, and that's usually the case with R2R DACs. My experience has been that R2R DACs usually have a little more depth to the soundstage, a little more of a three-dimensional or holographic sound than Delta Sigma DACs do. That's not always the case, but it just seems to kind of lean that way, where R2R DACs just tend to, on average, have a little more depth to the soundstage. Power-wise, I mentioned that I used the Hifiman Susvara with this and the HE6 SE version 2. And the Susvara is the most power-hungry headphone that I've ever tried. And I think that's the experience of most people. It needs a ton of power. It needs a ton of current is what it really needs. Not so much voltage, but it needs an amp that can put out current. And this amp does just fine with the Susvara. This amp isn't the absolute last word in power. I mean, some of the other amps that I've tried, like say Hifiman's own Prelude, which is a $2,400 amp, and that's just an amp without a DAC. That does, I think it's rated 10 watts per channel, does take a little bit better control of the Susvara, takes it a little bit further, but this amp at 5.12 watts does very well with the Susvara. If you bought a Susvara and don't have a fortune to spend on an amp DAC, to get you started, this would be a very good choice in my opinion. You might want to upgrade somewhere down the line, but I think you'd be pretty happy with this amp DAC with a headphone even up to the level of the Susvara. Same thing with the HE6, did very well, but this, whatever headphone I hooked up to this, it did a very good job. And with the two gain settings, background noise isn't an issue. If you have a sensitive headphone, just switch it down to low gain and you're not going to hear any hiss or anything like that. I did want to mention that, and I did tell you earlier that this has an option of oversampling or non-oversampling. And to be honest with you, my preference has been the non-oversampling mode. In most cases, the non-oversampling mode seems to have a larger, more holographic soundstage than the oversampling. The oversampling is a little smoother, but the non-oversampling just seems to have a little more depth and even a little bit more width, just a bigger, more layered soundstage to me. So I did probably 90% of my listening in the non-oversampling stage. Okay, if you saw my original review, and this was probably like 3 years ago, of the EF400, I said that I preferred the oversampling mode, but I found out that a few of the very first EF400s had a problem, something in the programming or whatever. I don't know what it was, but the non-oversampling mode wasn't functioning correctly, and it had a really small, compact sound stage. Okay, so I later received an updated version of the EF400, and once I listened to that, I was at the same place I am with this amp, where I prefer the non-oversampling mode. So if you saw my original EF400 review, I said that I like that I like the oversampling mode better, but that wasn't the case once I got the updated EF400. And the updated EF400 is the one that I compared to this amp in my comparison, and I'll get to that. Well, I'll get to that right now. Okay, so my comparisons. I'm going to start with Hi-Fi Man's own EF400, and the big question is this an upgrade? If you've already have the EF400, will going to the F600 be an upgrade? And I'm gonna take that in two different directions, because the first direction I want to go is my biggest problem with the EF400. I really like the sound of the EF400. I thought it was a great amp DAC as far as sound. My issue with the EF400, and I very clearly pointed out this issue in my review of it, is I did not like the fact that it only had one input. It had one digital input, which was USB, no other digital inputs, not a coax, not a optical, and it had no analog inputs. So your only option with the EF400 is to hook it up to a USB source like my computer. Cannot hook up a CD player, and I cannot use the EF400 as a standalone amp using another DAC or, a built-in DAC and a CD player, whatever. USB was the only option. So if you have an EF400 and that is your issue, only having one input, then this is definitely a step up with not only USB, but it has coax input, so you can hook this to a CD player. It has Bluetooth, and then this also has two analog inputs. So that right there alone, in my opinion, makes this a upgrade from the EF400. Now, the other direction is sound. If you're going by sound, I would say that there's not a huge difference between the sound of the EF400 and the EF600. They actually have a very similar sound, and it took me quite a while, quite a bit of comparing back and forth to really pick up on the differences. And I do want to point out that the differences are very small. There are some differences in the sound, but they're very small. Number one, I'll start with, I think the EF400 has a slightly warmer, richer mid-range than the EF600, where the 600 is a little bit drier in the mid-range. Okay, and then also the EF400 uses the regular Himalaya DAC chips, where this uses the Pro. And the Pro, from what I'm hearing, gives a little bit smoother sound, but a little bit softer at the same time, where the EF400 has it can have a slight amount of grain once in a while in some recordings, the EF400, but it has a little bit more punchy, a little bit more edgy, a little more edge to the sound, a little more edge to the notes, a little bit more aggressive, where this is a the EF600 is more of a softer, smoother sound. They both are very dynamic. They both have enough power to be punchy and dynamic, but I think it's the DAC in this. It just kind of smooths off the rough edges on the notes and just creates a little bit of a smoother sound. And that can be a good thing or a bad thing. It kind of depends on the recording. It kind of depends on the headphones. So my opinion is sound-wise, this is kind of a sideways step from the EF400, not necessarily an upgrade. You might like it better, or you might like the EF400 better. To be honest, I kind of lean towards liking the sound of the EF400 better. This has a little more power. I think the F400 is 4 watts per channel. This is 5.12. It's not really noticeable. They both do a very good job of driving the Sesfara. Okay, I'm going to go to the Serenade. The Hifiman Serenade, oh, I did forget to mention that the EF400 is quite a bit less expensive at $399 compared to $649 for this, and it's more of a horizontal unit. You know, it's like 2 inches tall and like 8 inches wide. So that's another thing. This, you know, if you have a height restriction of a shelf or on your desk, you know, underneath something, this may be too tall, but it has a smaller footprint. Okay, compared to the Hifiman Serenade, and the Serenade is more expensive at $999. The Serenade, I believe, uses the exact same DAC chips, the Hifiman Himalaya Pros, and but it is manufactured for Hifiman by Golden Wave, which I believe Hifiman did purchase and owns Golden Wave now. But in my opinion, the Serenade is just the sound is a little more refined. It doesn't really sound different. And the differences are very subtle, but it is slightly warmer. The Serenade, I notice, and it depends on the headphones, and I think it's the impedance of the headphones that makes a difference. If I use a high impedance headphone, or not really high, but a higher, like a mid impedance headphone, like the HE6 SE version 2, which is 50 ohms, or the Sesfara, which is 60 ohms, I don't hear a lot of difference in the tone balance between the EF600 and the Serenade. Just the Serenade is just slightly warmer and slightly richer in the mid-range. But if I use a lower impedance headphone, like say the Aria Organic or the Ananda Nano or the EF400, the HE400 SE, which are all like 16 to 20 ohms, then I hear a bigger difference. With the low impedance headphones of like 16 to 20 ohms, I hear the Serenade is being quite a bit richer and warmer in the mid-range. A bigger difference with the low impedance headphones than the mid impedance headphones. So I guess the impedance is affecting that amp more than this one, but anyway, with like the Ananda Nano, which I think is 20 ohms, definitely a richer, warmer mid-range with the Serenade. The Serenade is kind of equal in features. It's once again a 2-inch tall by like 11-inch wide unit, lays down. It's different shaped. It has a heavy aluminum case. To me, it just looks and feels a little bit more high-end. Possibly sounds a little bit more high-end, but it is $350 more expensive at $999. And what else? I had something else I was going to say about it, but I don't even know where it is right now. Oh, it's up here. I don't think it's in your view. But I do like the Serenade, but like I said, it's a little bit more expensive. Okay, comparing this to the, where am I at? The iFi Neo IDSD2. And I did want to mention this is the Neo 2, not the original. The Neo 2 is a big jump up from the 1 in my opinion, especially the amp part of it, because the amp went from like 1 watt per channel to like 5¼ watts per channel in the Neo 2. Okay, the Neo 2 is a little more expensive at $899. And the big difference is that iFi has a ton of features that this doesn't have. It has something like 6 different options as far as digital roll-off filters. It has a bass boost button. It has a expanse button that expands the sound stage. It has 4 gain settings where this only has 2 gain settings. The iFi uses a hybrid type of DAC. It's not an R2R DAC. It's not a Delta Sigma. Apparently, it's some sort of hybrid mix of the two. In my opinion, the iFi etches out a little bit more detail than this amp does, and I think it's the DAC is a difference, because I used this as a DAC into the Prelude, and I used the iFi as a standalone DAC into the Prelude, and I heard a little bit more detail with the iFi. Not to say this is bad, it's just the iFi is exceptional in detail. Both are a little on the warm side of neutral, so they're about the same that way. And then power-wise, although the iFi does do a very good job with the Susvara, I kind of feel like this just has a little more power there, a little more headroom available, and might drive the Susvara just a little bit better than the iFi. Other than that, not a huge difference in the sound, but like I said, kind of 2 different amps. But like I said, the iFi beats this out just slightly in detail, but it's something you will never notice. You will never notice a lack of detail in this unless you compare it to something that goes a little bit further. It's kind of like if you have like an HE1000 headphone. You're never going to notice a lack of detail unless you compare it directly to something like the Susvara. Then you might, but you're never going to miss that detail until you compare it directly. Well, that's kind of the way this is. The detail on this is still excellent, and absolutely no problems. I kind of could prefer the controls a little bit on the iFi unit, where, like I said, my one issue is toggling this through the one button to toggle through 4 settings of gain and oversampling, where the iFi has separate buttons, and the iFi does have an optical input. Okay, comparing this to the topping stack, the A70 Pro and D70 Pro Saber version, first of all, that stack is about $1,200, and that is rated at something like 10 or 12 watts per channel. It has a huge amount of power, but this has enough power for even the Susvara, so that's not really an issue. The iFi that uses a Delta Sigma DAC, top of the line Saber Delta Sigma, and in my opinion, it does etch out a little more detail than this does, but this does have a warmer, richer sound, and this does have more depth to the soundstage. So that detail on the topping comes at the expense of a slightly dry, slightly sterile sound, where this does have a richer, more musical, warmer mid-range, which I really like. And the topping can become fatiguing after a while. It has crazy detail, but like I said, a little dry, a little analytical, and that type of sound, especially if your headphones are leaning towards the dry or analytical, it can become fatiguing, where a headphone such as the the HE6 SE version 2, which is a very neutral headphone with a very clean, detailed mid-range. To be honest, the topping can, with that headphone, can become a little bit fatiguing. Just too much detail can almost be overwhelming and a little dry, little sterile, where this gives it a more pleasant, a little bit warmer, richer sound. So, you know, each has its good things, its bad things, but overall, I'm just going to say that this is a really nice amp DAC, and for the money, $650, I think that's a very fair price. You're getting a lot for your money. The only thing this does lack is it does not have a preamp function. You cannot switch this to having the outputs volume controlled. You can only use this as a standalone DAC, not as a volume controlled preamp. So basically, kind of round it up for you. My likes about this, it has really good power. I like the R2R DAC with a nice, warm, kind of rich sound. I like the 5 inputs, 3 digital and 2 analog. It's just a very enjoyable amp DAC to listen to, and there's a lot to like about it. Dislikes are very minor and things I can live with. The lack of an optical input is something that I would like to see added to it in the future. Not absolutely crazy about the looks of it. The rectangle volume knob is just kind of weird to me. I think it would look better with a big round volume knob on it, and the plastic case on it doesn't do much for me. And then the 1 button toggle to go through 4 oversampling and gain modes. I would rather have a switch like on the Ef600 where you can go back and forth and not have to toggle through all 4, or 2 separate buttons would be nice. So other than that, I really like this. I can recommend it. So the bottom line, it's a very good, very solid headphone amp and DAC. Sometimes you get a good DAC with a amp thrown in. Sometimes you get a good amp with a okay DAC thrown in. And these seem to be very equal. You're getting a very balanced headphone amp and DAC, both of very good quality. Neither the amp part of this or the DAC part is going to disappoint you. But if you do want to upgrade the DAC in the future, or I'm sorry, the amp, you can use the analog outputs of this into another amp. Say you want to upgrade to something like the Hifiman Prelude, you can use this as your DAC. So once again, it has enough power for any headphone, including the Sespara and the HE6. And just a very nice amp DAC, nothing extremely fancy, pretty simple, not a whole lot of unnecessary features, but solid, sounds good, works with any headphone, and yes, I can recommend it. So I'm going to wrap this up. Once again, this is William from the Headphone Experience. If this video helped you, please give me a thumbs up. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel if you haven't already. And please join us over at the Headphone Experience on Facebook. We are now at 36,000 members, and I'd like to see you all over there. And once again, thanks for watching my video.